Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again, and we're now going to talk about boxing and do a quick fight review of the recent British heavyweight clash between Daniel Dubois and Joyce. So if you haven't seen the fight yet or you don't know the result, I advise you to stop watching this video now, go away, catch up with some highlights or full version of the fight, and then come back to this review. So we're going to talk about this fight now, and to be honest, a very tame finish to what was a decent competitive fight, resulting in a 10th round stoppage of Daniel Dubois by Joyce in the most really unexpected fashion. Just seemed to come out of nowhere, really. A stiff jab to the eye that had been marked up throughout the fight through the constant jabbing of Joyce. Daniel Dubois seemed to just go down on his knee and not have any heart or desire to carry on and continue with the fight. It was a very unexpected outcome. Dubois was very much in the fight. It was a decent competitive scrap, as many commented throughout. I had Dubois a couple of rounds up throughout the fight, and I'll talk through more about the details in a minute. But yeah, to just essentially, and I hate using this term when talking about fighters because it's very easy for someone to sit in front of a screen or a microphone and talk about fighters. It's very different when you're actually in the ring taking punches. You know, we always look at it from a viewing perspective. The punches hurt a lot more when you're actually taking them on the chin or in the eye, as opposed to when you're watching them on a television screen, of course. But, you know, I think there's a fan expectation within the sport when we look at boxers as fighting men, hard men. Okay, if you're beaten or you're knocked out or you lose on points by the more skilled fighter or the more heavier puncher, fair enough. But I think we expect these boxers to at least go out on a shield, to at least go all out, to at least, if they're going to lose, either lose close matches or lose taking the fight to their opponent. And when we see tame finishes like that, we are always going to question the attitude and the discipline of the fighter, regardless of where they are within the stage of their career. We had most recently with Kell Brook, of course, when we look at his fight with Errol Spence, and many people deem that a quit. And if you're going to associate that as a fighter quitting, then when you compare to what happened here with Dubois, then it is pretty much the same scenario. It's almost the same sequence of events where you have a fighter who was very much in the fight. I had him a couple of rounds up. Many had Dubois winning a close fight. There was no real sense that he was coming under pressure or heavy adversity or intensity throughout the fight. He seemed to be on his feet. There was no alarming signs from his corner. There was no hints at all as to whether they were going to pull him out the fight. His face was marked up about the jabs, which I will talk about in a minute, but he seemed to be on his feet. He was still moving around. He was still throwing punches. He seemed to have all his senses intact. So there was no early signs that he was going to quit within this fight. So that's why it was such a surprising outcome. But if I just go quickly through the fight overall, the first couple of rounds were pretty non-eventful. Joyce was surprisingly on the front foot in the first round, leading with his left jab. You know, Joyce was the bigger, the taller man, and you always find out that the taller man will always use his jab, try to box at range, and that is really the trademark of Joyce, his jab, and he was using it constantly throughout the fight, particularly in the early rounds. And then in the round two, Dubois then came forward. It's almost as if maybe his corner had a word with him that he had to step up the intensity, and he started coming forward. He was being more aggressive. Joyce really wasn't doing a lot more, just using that left jab constantly, but Dubois was now beginning to try and step on the gas and look forward to really take it to Joyce, throwing those left hooks, those powerful right hands that he's shown throughout his fights. Again, we go in the third round, and he really did come out swinging. He was now looking for those powerful shots, and to be fair, he was actually scoring with a couple of good 1-2 combinations, and that's always good to see from fighters who have that power and that big size, that they use some sort of skillful combination shots when they're attacking their opponent. So the boy was definitely on the front foot, and you could see how much of that energetic start taken out from him, and that was the way really for the next couple of rounds, where Dubois was coming forward, swinging, landing with some success, but then he would come on the back foot because it was taking a lot of his energy away. And it was a very contrast between the two, whereas Dubois was coming in, starting fast and then slowing down, whereas Joyce was being more at a consistent pace. Nothing spectacular, nothing too hyperbole about his work, but just using that jab, moving around, using that jab steady, just popping away at Dubois. And I suppose you can give Joyce some credit because he was being very accurate, and you could see as the fight went on that Dubois' face continually got marked up and his eye was really starting to swell up as the rounds went on. But we look at again rounds 4 and 5, we had more right hooks from Dubois landing, and I was critical of him at this stage because I think he wasn't showing enough body work. I think when you have the taller opponent who's using their jab, what you've got to do is try and use your lateral movement and work inside and throw punches to the body. That will then slow the opponent down, and then that's when you can break him down and then build up your punches and work your way towards more the headshots. But Dubois, he wasn't doing that, and I think another deficiency in his work was that there was no head movement, and this is why Joyce was being so successful with the jab, because Dubois just wasn't moving. He was just moving in straight lines, and that eye in particular was becoming such an easy, consistent target for Joyce. He really couldn't miss with the jab at that point, even though he wasn't really throwing anything else. Though he had the 1 or 2 instances when he would throw the right hand, but it didn't really land with any impact or power. But Dubois was just charging forward, not mindlessly, not like a brawler. No, he was having some success with his right hooks, but again, he just kept getting marked up with that jab constantly throughout the fight. We go on to the 7th round, and again, Dubois threw 1 or 2 big combinations, but at this point, I think Joyce was showing a bit more of the experience because he was working at a much more consistent pace. That means his stamina was maintaining itself throughout, whereas Dubois was in these short, sharp bursts and then fading away, and you could kind of begin to see the signs that he was tiring a bit. Not fading away, he was still active, he was still throwing punches. You'd expect that from a youngster like Dubois, but he wasn't carrying the same intensity. He couldn't maintain the same intensity all the way throughout the round. So he'd get a fast start and then fade, a fast start and then fade. And Joyce was picking up, he was on his feet, bouncing on his toes, using that jab, moving around the ring. And again, these are scoring punches. They're not powerful punches. They're not taking the energy away from Dubois, but it's much more of a cumulative effect rather than a big power shot. If you're just getting constantly barraged with these shots, it's going to have its impact overall within the fight, and we saw that within the latter stages. Again, round 8, we saw tiredness from Dubois. He did score a good right hand early on, but Joyce continually just being more accurate with the work. And then the 9th round, that's really where we saw the stamina and endurance take its toll on Dubois. The pace really slowed down a lot, and not really a lot happened in this 9th round, but Joyce was just looking a much more composed and settled fighter, and Dubois at this point was really, I don't want to say running out of ideas, but he was just lacking a bit of versatility in his attack. He was very much in this fight, no doubt about it, but he clearly wanted to try and get the knockout win. Joyce, I don't think, was ever looking for a knockout win. He was looking to just protect himself behind the jab and score points off it. And then we go to the 10th round, and this is where it happened, and it was just so strange because there seemed to be nothing in it in the beginning of the round. Yeah, a couple of jabs were landing from Joyce. You can clearly see that the eye was swelling big time from Dubois. His eye looked almost shut at that point, but he was still active. You know, there was no blood coming from it. You know, he wasn't really he was marked up a bit on the lip, but again, he didn't seem to be taking much heavy damage. It was a cumulative effect, as I said, but all of a sudden he takes one jab. It was flush on the eye. I will credit that. It was bang on the eye, and then he seemed to just kneel down. And again, I hate using the terminology here, but I don't know if you want to say quit or lost the fight or lost the hunger. So far, at the time of doing this video, nothing else has come out about maybe there was anything else wrong with Dubois. There was something else hindering him. I don't think they will throw that excuse. That's not his personality in many ways. He seems like that sort of person who will take this loss on the chin and just admit that the better fighter won on the day. But it was just so strange. It just came out of nowhere. It was even more sudden than what we had with the Terence Crawford and Kell Brook fight, if you remember, a couple of weeks ago. Now, the Crawford jab was much more sharper, but even that didn't seem to have power, but it did have enough to throw Kell Brook off balance. That wasn't the case here. There, the jab just... I'm still in shock just seeing the way that the jab really just came out of nowhere and just had that effect on Dubois, who's a big unit, of course. And the way he just was pouring at his eye, he stepped down, he didn't even get up. The referee was counting him and Dubois was just on one knee. He didn't even look to step up. We all see so many times when fighters, they get back up after the 10 count, and that's the telling difference. Normally a fighter doesn't quit when they get up, and if the ref stops it or pulls him back, standard tactic is to always put your hands up and show that you're ready to fight on. But there was none of that from Dubois. There was no remonstrating afterwards. There was no reaction from him afterwards. And I hate to say it again, it just looks like he gave up. There's no other way to put it across, really. And a lot of people will say now, what does it say about Dubois? And I think this is telling again, when you have a lot of these fighters where you build them up, you want to pad their record with low-level opponents, so they score these knockout wins, these early round stoppages, so they look good, and you can ride up the hype and you can build them up as the potential next big superstar to dominate the game. This is what happens when all of a sudden you make that jump to a decent opponent. And Joyce, to be fair, is a decent opponent, much more better in quality and experience than what the previous opponents that Daniel Dubois had. If you look at the previous opponent Daniel Dubois fought against, what was that, a second round stoppage? The guy was nothing more than a human punching bag, really. And when you make that step in quality, it is a culture shock. It is a different shift in levels that the fighter has to adjust to. He's gone from fights where he normally takes the guy out in a couple of punches, and then he all of a sudden makes that shift to where he's throwing a lot of his good shots and the guy is standing there withstanding them and still standing strong and standing tough. That's a very difficult mental adjustment that a young fighter has to make when you're bringing them up that way, when you're giving them easy opponents and then suddenly making that shift in quality. It affects a lot of the mindset, and I think that's partly what it was. I think it got to the point when Dubois had realised that this was a tough fight. He'd never come across this amount of adversity before. It was a culture shock to him. It was a shock to the system. His eye was puffing up. Again, he's never come under that sort of pressure before. And it was a new sensation, it was a new feeling, and he just decided just to not carry on. Now a lot of people say, well, when you're bringing these fighters up, you can't just put them in these dangerous fights straight away, have them getting beaten up earlier on in their career. No, but at the same time, you've got to put them in there with much stronger levels of competition, because that's when really they develop those skills and they learn their punch resistance and their will. It's in the early part of their career, the amateur stage of their career. That's when they develop those strength qualities and tough mentality. It's in the early part of their career. But if you don't give them that, then when they make that jump in quality, this is what happens. And I think that was the case here. It was a case of where he couldn't put his opponent away. We saw that throughout the rounds. He was making a lot of effort and he was doing some good work. This was not a case of Dubois getting schooled. He didn't get taken to a boxing clinic. No, this was a very even competitive fight and Dubois was doing very well. But again, when you're taking shots back, when you've got an opponent who can withhold your power, can repel you, can give as good as they get, then that's when you've really got to make adjustments. And obviously at this young age, Dubois hasn't got that complete game at the moment. There was no head movement, there was no using his jab more often, there was no jab to the body, there was no body work doing anything to slow Joyce down, there was no trying to tie Joyce down, use maybe rougher tactics, lull him into a corner and put more pressure on him. There was nothing of that. He was just coming forward and just constantly getting tagged and constantly getting caught. Now if this had gone on to the full 12 rounds, I probably would have given it to Dubois, maybe in a close points decision, maybe by a round or two. I would have understood if it was a draw. Like I said, it was a decent competitive fight. And I don't want to dismiss Joyce at all, because he did perform very well, used his jab very well. My issue with Joyce is that is all he's got, to an extent, is that he's got good footwork, he's got good balance, he's got a good stance, but his main weapon is that jab, and you cannot use that against the top level guys. You cannot go around expecting to just jab your way to victory. You know, there comes a point where you're going to have to throw that right hand and throw it with a lot more power and combination, and I didn't see that a lot from Joyce in this fight. So he was very accurate and very concise with that jab, and yeah, he was scoring a lot of points. So I probably wouldn't argue too much if many people had Joyce up in this fight, but I would only put that by a round or two. I wouldn't say this was a complete landslide victory for Joyce prior to that stoppage. So where do we go from here? Now, I know a lot of fans, and I'm seeing a lot of reactions. There is disappointment because, myself included, we were looking at Daniel Dubois to be that next heavyweight superstar. That's what we're always looking for throughout boxing. We want that next person who's going to come on and dominate the sport and become that real figurehead that I think the sport requires. Yes, okay, we've got Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, but if we look at it now, you know, Tyson Fury is what, 31, 32 now? Joshua now is 28, 29. So they are coming towards, if you like, the third phase, entering the latter phases of their careers, right? So we need to see who is going to pick up the pace from them, especially when we're in this current pandemic climate and it's becoming increasingly more frustrating and difficult to make these big fights happen. You know, fighters are barely fighting twice a year now. So how much longer is Tyson Fury going to be in the game for? How much longer is Anthony Joshua going to be in the game for? You know, once they fight each other, will they quit? And then will the belts get dispersed all over the place? And then we really get a fractured look towards the division again? That's not what I think any fan wants. What fan want is that fighter that's going to come through, become undisputed champion, and then dominate the sport, having these high level fights throughout. And people saw that potential in Daniel Dubois. And to be fair, there was not the same hyperbolic levels that we got with Anthony Joshua. You know, Daniel Dubois is a very modest, downbeat personality, and I think that's what people liked a lot about him. He's big, he's strong, he's powerful. There was no overhype about him. You know, he was proven in the ring to an extent, but people liked Dubois in general. They liked his personality and they wanted to see him do well. They wanted to see him ascend to the top of the division. But this loss, and it's not the fact that he lost, because fighters will always lose. The best legends of the game have all lost and come back again. It's the manner of the loss. You know, I think in a strange way it would have been even better if he either got knocked out or he got pummeled to the point where the fight was stopped, because at least then people can say, well, he went all out, he went on his shield, he went all the way, he's strong, he's young, and then he can come back again. But when you, and I hate using this word again, when you quit or you give up like that, it shows signs of your certain character, right? Because you came under adversity for the first time and you couldn't handle it. So what would happen when you came up against, let's say, the likes of AJ or Andy Ruiz or even a Luis Ortiz? You know, these are guys are big punchers, they're aggressive, they're going to come forward. What would happen when you come under heavy fire from these fighters? What would you do? Are you going to withstand and come back, or are you going to give up again like you seemingly did in this fight here against a fighter who was primarily just using his jab? What are you going to be like when you come across a power puncher, right? And that's the question that now is going to be hanging over Dubois in this fight. What, or how is he going to come back from this? How is he going to react? What opponent are they going to give him? Will they give him a soft opponent? Okay, that might be a good confidence boost to getting a win again, but at some point, if he does want to ascend to the top of the game, if he does want to have any aspirations of becoming a heavyweight champion or undisputed champion, he's going to have to put his head back in the fire again. You know, whether it'll be a rematch against Joyce, or maybe some people are talking about Chisora, or maybe they might use David Price. I mean, they could have maybe used Dave Allen, but Dave Allen's retired now, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure who they're going to put him against. What I would say is I think Daniel Dubois maybe got to do a bit of soul searching and look at whether he really wants to be in this game, because he's going to come under a lot of more pressure than what he did tonight, especially when at this stage he doesn't have that head movement, he doesn't have those evasive qualities that you need, right? Let's say like a Tyson Fury, who can use his jab and has got very great movement and knows how to tie an opponent up and lean on them and stifle them and neutralize any momentum that his opponent has. Daniel Dubois doesn't have that yet. So what will he do now? You know, next fight, what will happen? Next fight he goes into and somebody tags that eye again. Will he get the same kind of pressures and flashbacks that we saw with Kell Brook, right? Remember, Kell Brook was undefeated as a welterweight. He steps in against Golovkin. He gets stopped in his 6th round, and then there was clearly a carryover as to what happened with Spence and when he seemingly quit against Spence. So what happens the next time Dubois comes under pressure? What is he going to do? Do you see, that's the concern, that's the worry. So I think there's a lot of soul searching to be done. There's a lot of thinking to be done here. I mean, you could put him back in with Joe Joyce. He's still got a chance against Joe Joyce. There's no indication here that Joyce will simply overpower him again. No, he's got a great chance against Joe Joyce, but unless he learns to diversify his attack and enhance his movements, his lateral movements, his head movement, then he will come under pressure again. And he's got to ask himself, when he does start to take those heavier punches, does he have the will? Does he have the determination? Does he have really the, if you like, the, how can I put this, the joy of boxing, the thrill of boxing? Does he have the desire to really carry on and come back? You know, criticise AJ, but AJ managed to come back against his victory against Andy Ruiz, right? And that was a way more punishing and demolition loss than what this was tonight. And AJ came back and won. So has Daniel Dubois got the desire there? We'll wait and see. But overall, just a very tame finish to a decent competitive fight. Well done to Joe Joyce. We'll see what happens with him now. At this stage, he's really only going to be looking for bigger fights if possible. Obviously, he won't be able to take on AJ and Fury right now. Maybe Usyk. That might be a decent, good fight for Joe Joyce if he wants a more prolific opponent. Maybe Dillian Whyte. Again, that would be very interesting if Dillian Whyte can get over his rematch against Povetkin and he can't manage to get his mandatory shot out of the way. That might be a potential fight down the line. Dillian Whyte against Joe Joyce, or maybe Joe Joyce against Chisora. So he's got a few more options, and at this late stage of his career, he's got to make sure that the fights he takes on are very prolific and he could earn as much as possible. So still some life yet in the career of Joe Joyce. But as for Daniel Dubois, very disappointing night and a very disappointing finish, I would say, more often. The performance prior to that was okay to good, but the tame finish and the way he, no other way to say it, he seemingly quit on the day, you know, it does not give a bad look, and he'll have a lot of thinking to do in the next coming months. So those are my thoughts on the Dubois and Joe Joyce fight. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Dubois quit? Do you think that maybe there was something else going on in the background that we don't know yet? Do you think that the jabs of Joe Joyce were a lot more impactful than what they seem to have on that 10th round? Or do you think it's another hope job being exposed? And are you really worried now, where are we going to get the next big superstar within the heavyweight division? So those are my thoughts on the Daniel Dubois Joe Joyce fight. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hit those like and subscribe buttons and help me to grow this channel in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.